The room is buzzing with the murmur of anticipation as the debate rages on. The cameras zoom in, capturing every slight movement, every breath, every flutter of an eyelash. At the center of it all stands Ted Cruz, leaning into his microphone with that trademark smirk, the kind that always seems to say, "I've already won." "Now, I'm not sure if anyone here has been paying attention," Cruz begins, his voice dripping with mockery, "but there's a little thing called reality. I know it's a concept some people have trouble grasping, but here we are." His words hang in the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. The crowd shifts uncomfortably, but Cruz is on a roll. He knows his target, and he's aiming straight for it. "Maybe it's time we take a step back," he continues, his eyes narrowing as he looks directly at Jasmine Crockett, "and face the hard truth, the one that the progressive dreamers can't seem to handle." He pauses for dramatic effect, eyes twinkling with arrogance. "Some problems just don't have simple answers, but don't worry, no one expects you to understand that." The camera cuts to Jasmine. Her expression remains calm, collected. The room seems to hold its breath as her face reveals nothing, no anger, no frustration, just quiet resolve. She knows what Cruz is trying to do. His mockery is designed to throw her off, to make her look small, less worthy. But she isn't flinching. The audience can feel the tension building. Cruz leans back in his chair, eyes glittering with confidence, as if he knows the moment belongs to him. But there's a shift in the air. Jasmine's gaze doesn't waver. Her hands rest calmly on the desk in front of her. It's almost as if she's preparing for something much bigger than just this petty attack. The entire room is waiting for her to snap, for her to lash out, for some kind of emotional reaction. But what happens next would leave Cruz silenced and the nation in awe. The spotlight intensifies, the tension hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The audience knows this isn't just another political debate. This is personal. This is monumental. Ted Cruz, with his polished veneer of calm, represents something much darker, a system that has long thrived on privilege, entitlement, and the comfortable status quo. He speaks in the language of the elite, the talking points of the Washington insiders who have, for decades, dictated policy without ever stepping into the shoes of the very people they claim to represent. His arguments are carefully constructed, laced with condescension, as if trying to convince the world that his brand of politics, one that keeps the rich richer and the powerless silenced, is the only acceptable way forward. Cruz is part of a machine. A machine that has repeatedly failed to address the struggles of real Americans, the families crushed by healthcare bills they can't afford, the communities ravaged by a criminal justice system that offers nothing but punishment, the immigrants who have fought tooth and nail to build a life, only to face disdain and fear-mongering from those in power. Cruz, standing at the center of this machine, embodies all of it, the disregard, the elitism, the rhetoric that keeps people divided and disillusioned. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, stands as the very antithesis of Cruz's world. She represents the people, the ones whose voices have been ignored, whose concerns are treated as afterthoughts. She is the underdog in this fight, but more than that, she is a force of nature. A product of the very struggles Cruz pretends to understand, Crockett's roots are in the streets, in the neighborhoods where real change is needed. She's not just an up-and-coming politician, she's a symbol of what America could be if it truly embraced its values of equality, opportunity, and justice. This isn't just about a debate. It's about a future where the will of the people actually means something. Where the voices of those who have long been marginalized are no longer drowned out by the same tired arguments of the privileged few. This is a clash of ideologies, of who truly represents the American dream. The issue at hand is more than just policy. It's about what kind of country America wants to be. Cruz argues for maintaining a system where power remains concentrated in the hands of the few, where inequality thrives under the guise of free markets and personal responsibility. His words, though eloquent, ring hollow when viewed through the lens of reality. They are the same words that have failed to lift up communities of color, to provide healthcare for the uninsured, to fix a broken immigration system. Crockett, however, argues for something more. She fights for a future where healthcare is a right, where the criminal justice system serves all people equally, and where immigrants are celebrated for their contributions instead of criminalized. She speaks to the heart of a nation that has always prided itself on the idea that anyone, regardless of their background, can succeed. A country where the dignity of the individual comes first, not the size of their bank account. In this moment, the stakes are clear. Cruz represents the old guard, the tired, worn-out policies that have brought America to the brink of division and inequality. Crockett represents the new, the hope of a nation ready to confront its flaws and heal. This isn't just a political debate. It's a battle for the soul of America. It's about whether the country will continue down a path that leaves millions behind, or whether it will finally embrace the values that should define it. What happens next could change the trajectory of American politics. It's no longer just about winning a debate. It's about shaping the future of a nation, and proving that when the people speak, their voices can no longer be ignored. Ted Cruz has always been a man who thrives in the shadows of Washington's corridors, carefully sculpting his public image as the ever-calm, ever-composed intellectual. His critics, though, have always seen past the facade. What Cruz wants the world to believe is, rational debate has often been nothing more than a thinly veiled mask for arrogance, self-interest, and condescension. It wasn't always this way. Cruz's rise to national prominence seemed, at first, to be the result of hard work and dedication. He was a star in the legal community, a brilliant mind whose sharp rhetoric and legal acumen won him accolades. But behind closed doors, it became clear that Cruz was far more interested in accumulating power than actually improving the lives of those he claimed to serve. The shine of his ambition was tainted by his readiness to manipulate any situation for his personal benefit. His early career was a microcosm of what would come to define him, a man who never shied away from using others to bolster his position. Whether it was disingenuously invoking religious rhetoric to silence his critics or accusing political opponents of selling out to special interests, Cruz had a way of turning every debate into a personal battlefield where only one side could win, his. His belief in his own intellectual superiority became his weapon of choice, and anyone who dared to challenge him was either dismissed as uninformed or attacked with relentless, biting sarcasm. His disdain for people who didn't share his worldview became particularly evident in moments where he could exploit cultural divides. Cruz's frequent mockery of progressive ideals was paired with frequent jabs at women and minorities, a pattern that earned him few friends outside of his base. In 2016, during a GOP primary debate, Cruz famously took shots at Hillary Clinton, belittling her experience and accomplishments with a level of venom rarely seen on the campaign trail. But his real failure, as it turned out, was his dismissive treatment of women who didn't fit into his narrow, conservative vision of the world. In the same debate, he mocked Clinton's policy approach, insinuating that her feminism was merely a product of her desire to appeal to a certain base. It wasn't just a swipe at her politics, it was an attack on the very concept of women rising to power in their own right. But that was just one example of Cruz's ongoing pattern. In 2018, during a Senate hearing on immigration reform, Cruz's dismissal of immigrant rights advocates became one of the more defining moments of his career. When a group of young activists came forward with personal testimonies about their struggles as children of immigrants, Cruz barely acknowledged their pain. Instead, he used the moment to lecture them, condescendingly explaining how real solutions came from the top down, and that they needed to listen to reason. He dismissed their lived experiences with a wave of his hand, calling their plea for compassion emotional manipulation. It wasn't the first time he had alienated marginalized communities. His refusal to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement and his continued opposition to progressive racial justice reforms painted him as someone who believed deeply in the status quo, no matter how much it harmed the very people who had been left behind by that same system. Cruz's stance was always the same: silence the voices of those who wanted change. And in doing so, he set the stage for a world where power was monopolized by the few, while those who demanded equity were met with derision. His tactics were simple: mock, belittle, and undermine. But they were effective, especially in a political climate that seemed to favor bombastic rhetoric over substance. When it came to confronting the real issues, Cruz had a knack for deflecting. Whether it was healthcare, immigration reform, or voting rights, Cruz always seemed to have a quip ready, a joke at the expense of those he disagreed with. His refusal to address any policy issue on a human level, a level that took into account the struggles of real people, was a clear indication that his focus was not on solutions, but on winning. Winning by any means necessary. Then came the moment with Jasmine Crockett. As Cruz sat across from her, his condescension was once again on full display. He had spent years crafting a public image of the man who could cut through the emotional arguments of the left and bring reason to the table. And now, here was this rising star, this young, dynamic woman, looking to tear down the very system Cruz had spent years building. He couldn't resist. His first instinct was to mock her, to diminish her stature in front of the world. After all, why would anyone listen to someone who hadn't paid their dues the way he had? But what Cruz didn't expect was that he was about to face someone who would turn his tactics back on him, a woman who had spent her life battling the systems Cruz represented. This wasn't just another politician, this was a woman who had been fighting for her people long before Cruz even set foot in the Senate, and she was about to show him that his arrogance was his greatest flaw. The world had already seen Cruz's arrogance play out time and again. But now, in this moment, it was about to cost him. What he couldn't foresee, what he couldn't have prepared for, was the power of someone who had nothing to lose, but everything to fight for. Jasmine Crockett's story isn't one of privilege, inherited wealth, or political connections. It's a story of struggle, resilience, and an unshakable belief that change doesn't come from the top, it comes from the streets, from the people, from the communities that have been ignored for too long. Born and raised in the heart of Dallas, Crockett grew up in a neighborhood where opportunity wasn't just scarce, it was practically non-existent. Her mother worked multiple jobs, scraping by to ensure that Jasmine and her siblings could survive. She was the first in her family to go to college, fighting not only against the limitations of her socioeconomic status, but also against a world that seemed determined to tell her that someone like her could never rise to the top. But Jasmine wasn't the kind of person who would accept that narrative. When she walked onto her college campus, she carried the weight of her community on her shoulders. She knew the odds were stacked against her, but she also knew that her education, her drive, and her fierce determination were tools that could level the playing field. She graduated with honors, a rare achievement for someone with her background, but it was only the beginning. After law school, Crockett could have taken the traditional route, climbed the corporate ladder, and taken a cushy job with a law firm, where her intelligence and work ethic would have been more than enough to guarantee success. But that wasn't who she was. She wasn't about personal gain, she was about making a difference. Crockett's decision to move back to her roots in Dallas wasn't just about geography, it was a return to the people she was determined to fight for. She worked as a public defender, representing those who didn't have the money for high-priced attorneys. She stood in courtrooms, day after day, defending the innocent and the wrongly accused, challenging a justice system that had been designed to keep the powerless exactly where they were. Her commitment to her clients wasn't just professional, it was personal. She saw herself in every person she represented, an immigrant mother who fled violence, a young man from the wrong side of the tracks trying to make something of himself, a single father who couldn't afford a lawyer when a traffic ticket spiraled into a criminal charge. To Crockett, their stories were her story, their struggles were hers. And she wasn't just defending them in court, she was fighting for their dignity, their futures, their right to be heard. But it wasn't easy. Crockett faced resistance at every turn. The legal system was stacked against her clients, and the political establishment, much like the system she fought against, was indifferent to their pain. As a black woman in a predominantly white and male legal world, she often found herself underestimated, looked down upon, and dismissed. But that only fueled her determination. Crockett knew that in order to make a real difference, she would need to challenge the very structures that kept people like her and her clients from succeeding. Her rise in politics wasn't just a career choice, it was a natural progression. She ran for office because she understood that real change wasn't just about fighting individual cases in court. It was about changing the policies that allowed those injustices to thrive in the first place. She ran to challenge the same system that had ignored her community for decades. And she won. But even in the political sphere, the challenges didn't stop. Being a woman of color in a predominantly white, male-dominated field came with its own set of obstacles. She faced outright hostility from those who saw her as a threat to their power, people who would rather dismiss her as an upstart than acknowledge the validity of her arguments. Cruz himself had been one of those figures, someone who believed that the political power structure he inhabited was immune to the voices of people like Jasmine. Yet, every challenge, every setback, only strengthened Crockett's resolve. She didn't just break barriers, she tore them down. She became a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the marginalized, and an advocate for the people who had been silenced for too long. As a congresswoman, she didn't just show up to vote, she showed up to fight. She spoke out against police brutality, fought for healthcare reform, and demanded justice for immigrant families who were being torn apart by a broken system. And she did all of this with the calm, unshakable demeanor of someone who knew what it meant to fight for something that truly mattered. But it wasn't just her policy positions that made her a rising star, it was the way she stood her ground, the way she showed up for the people, every single time. She didn't need to be loud or brash to make an impact. Crockett's power came from her ability to stay composed, to speak truth to power, and to refuse to be cowed by the forces that sought to keep her, and the people she represented, down. It's this resilience that would ultimately set her apart when she faced Cruz. While Cruz relied on mockery and dismissiveness, Crockett's weapon was something far more powerful, a quiet, unwavering strength. She wasn't just another politician. She was a living testament to the values that so many had fought for before her. She knew what it was like to fight for justice, to rise from adversity, and to face down the entrenched powers that had worked so hard to keep people like her out of the conversation. Little did Cruz know, Jasmine Crockett was about to show the world what true leadership looks like, leadership not built on arrogance or elitism, but on the unwavering belief that every voice, every person, and every struggle matters. The day was coming when she would remind him, and the world, that the fight for justice wasn't just about winning debates, it was about standing up for what was right, no matter the odds. The room is electric now, charged with the anticipation of the next round. Ted Cruz's earlier mockery of Jasmine Crockett was more than just a jab, it was a calculated attempt to undermine her, to reduce her to nothing more than an emotional, inexperienced voice in the crowd. But Crockett's composed silence in the face of his taunts only deepened the mystery. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't faltered. And now, Cruz was determined to break her. He leans into the microphone again, his voice dripping with smug superiority. "You know, Miss Crockett," he begins, twisting his lips into a smile that barely disguises the venom beneath, "you keep speaking in these lofty ideals, these grand visions of change. But the reality is much more complicated than you'd like to admit." He shifts in his seat, leaning forward just enough to make it clear he's about to deliver a rhetorical blow. "What you and your allies fail to understand is that governing is not about what sounds good in a speech, it's about what can actually get done. You can't just pass laws based on emotion. It's not how the world works, no matter how much you wish it would." The audience responds with a murmur, some nodding in agreement, others clearly unsettled by his dismissal of the very real struggles Crockett has spoken about. Cruz knows this, of course. His whole strategy is built on the idea that he's the embodiment of rational, practical politics, while Crockett represents naive idealism. He sees her as an obstacle, a threat to the old order he so desperately clings to. But Crockett, as always, remains unfazed. Her eyes are steady, her posture composed. She doesn't need to shout to make her point, she doesn't need to react to his taunts. She knows exactly what's at stake here. Her voice, when she speaks, is calm but carries the weight of conviction. "Well, Senator Cruz," she begins, her tone even but sharp, "it's easy to hide behind the excuse of practicality when you've never had to face the consequences of a broken system. When you've never been forced to choose between putting food on the table and paying for healthcare. When you've never had to watch your neighbor be torn from their family by a law that doesn't care about the lives it destroys." The room falls silent. Cruz tightens his jaw, his face flushing, but he doesn't interrupt. He knows better than to let her derail his narrative just yet. Still, the cracks in his calm facade are beginning to show. Crockett continues, her voice unwavering. You say it's about what can actually get done. But I've seen the consequences of inaction. I've seen families lose everything because a system that's too complicated or too rational couldn't be bothered to meet them where they are. It's not about ideals, Senator, it's about people. Real people who need solutions, not excuses. The tension in the room ratchets up. Cruz sneers, but there's no biting retort. Instead, he shifts tactics, his voice taking on an even sharper edge. People like you, Ms. Crockett, Cruz spits, you're always talking about what's fair, what's right. But in the real world, fairness doesn't pay the bills. Fairness doesn't protect our borders. Fairness doesn't keep our country safe. He gestures to the audience, almost as though to say, you're with me on this, right? But Crockett, ever the calm strategist, refuses to be lured into a tit-for-tat fight. She doesn't rise to the bait. She simply watches him with a steady gaze, letting the weight of his words linger before responding. Fairness, she says, each syllable deliberate, is the foundation of a just society. And the system you defend has proven time and again that it only works for those who already have everything. It leaves behind the workers, the immigrants, the single mothers trying to make a living in a world stacked against them. Fairness is not about protecting the status quo, it's about dismantling the barriers that prevent people from having a fair shot at success. The crowd shifts. The air crackles with the weight of her words. Cruz's smirk wavers, but he presses on, not yet ready to admit defeat. Ah, yes, he retorts, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The same old progressive line. Dismantle the system, level the playing field. It sounds nice, but it doesn't account for the very real dangers we face. It doesn't protect us from the chaos that comes when you let people like them run rampant. He gestures broadly, a clear reference to immigrants, the poor, anyone who challenges the dominant narrative. His rhetoric is divisive, meant to incite fear and distract from the issues at hand. But Crockett doesn't flinch. She knows exactly what Cruz is doing, and she won't let him derail the conversation. She takes a moment before responding, her words slow and deliberate, like a master chess player anticipating her opponent's next move. You call it chaos, she says, her voice rising just enough to carry across the room. But it's not chaos to want a system that works for everyone. It's not chaos to believe that healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. It's not chaos to demand that our criminal justice system stops punishing people for the color of their skin or the status of their immigration papers. The tension in the room is almost unbearable now. Cruz's face betrays a flicker of frustration as he leans back in his chair, his hands steepled in front of him. He's losing ground. The audience can feel it. His typical dismissiveness isn't landing the way it once did. But what Cruz doesn't realize is that every insult he threw only paved the way for one powerful moment. He was pushing Crockett to a point where she would no longer be able to hold back the truth that had been simmering beneath the surface. The stage was set, and what came next would not only silence him, it would shake the very foundation of the debate. The tension in the air is palpable. The room feels smaller now, as if the weight of the moment has somehow condensed the space between Cruz and Crockett. The crowd is on edge, sensing that the debate has reached a boiling point. Cruz, his smirk still plastered on his face, leans forward, looking for the next jab, the next way to twist the conversation. He believes he's won. He's ready to move in for the kill. But then, Crockett stands. It's not a grand, dramatic gesture, no sweeping motion, no loud declaration. It's simply the shift in her posture, the subtle way she straightens her back, leans into the microphone, and meets Cruz's eyes. There's a quiet strength in her, a calm that only seems to deepen the more Cruz pushes. She doesn't need to yell. She doesn't need to respond with anger. She's already won. But she's not done. She's going to finish this with surgical precision. Senator Cruz, she begins, her voice smooth, controlled, but laced with an unmistakable edge. You've spent the last few minutes mocking my positions, attacking my character, and belittling the very people you claim to represent. You've called my beliefs emotional, idealistic, and naive. But let's take a moment to look at the facts, shall we? The room holds its breath. It's clear that something has shifted. Crockett is in complete control now, and Cruz knows it. Let's talk about healthcare, she continues, her tone still steady but carrying the weight of every statistic, every injustice she's seen in her career. You've spent years defending a system where healthcare is a luxury, not a right. You argue that it's too costly, too complicated to ensure that every American has access to the care they need. But let me ask you, Senator, who gets left behind in that system? Who's left to suffer because of your insistence that only the wealthy can afford to stay healthy? She doesn't give him time to answer, pressing on with the force of her argument. The people who get left behind are the ones you pretend to represent, the working-class families who can't pay for a doctor's visit, the children whose parents are too afraid to take them to the hospital because they can't afford the bills. You talk about practicality, but how practical is it to force people into bankruptcy just because they get sick? How practical is it to have a system that protects the profits of big pharma while people die because they can't afford the treatment that could save their lives? The audience is beginning to stir, and Cruz's jaw tightens. He knows where this is going, but he can't stop it. Crockett pauses, letting the weight of her words sink in. The room is quiet, waiting for the next strike. Cruz, ever the politician, shifts in his seat, but there's a hint of unease in his eyes. For the first time in the debate, he's on the defensive. Now, let's move on to immigration, she says, her voice cutting through the tension. You've spent years defending policies that separate families, that imprison children in cages, that tear apart the very fabric of what this country claims to stand for. And yet, you want to lecture me about fairness? You want to lecture me about what's right? The same man who wants to build walls to keep people out, who dehumanizes immigrants, who stands with the very forces that have caused pain and suffering for millions? Crockett's gaze is unwavering. You talk about security, Senator, but what does security mean when it's built on the backs of people who've come to this country in search of a better life? What does security mean when it comes at the expense of children who don't know if they'll ever see their parents again? Cruz shifts uncomfortably, but Crockett isn't done. She takes a breath, her next words deliberate, almost too calm. And don't even get me started on your supposed moral superiority. You've spent your entire career defending the very systems that keep the rich rich and the poor poor. You've stood in front of crowds, pretending to care about the working man, but when it comes time to actually put policies in place that help them, you throw your support behind tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans. You stand up and pretend to care about families, but your policies have left countless families struggling, suffering, and begging for change. The room is silent now, utterly silent. Even Cruz is still, as if he's been momentarily stunned by the weight of her words. There's nothing left to say. The contradictions in his rhetoric, the hypocrisy in his actions, are too glaring to ignore. He can't defend them, not here, not now. Crockett's eyes never leave his as she delivers her final blow. You've spent your entire career telling people that their pain doesn't matter, that their struggles are just an unfortunate side effect of progress. But I'm here to tell you, Senator, that those struggles are real. The pain is real. And the people who suffer because of your policies? They are real, too. They're my neighbors, my family, my friends. And I'll be damned if I let you continue to pretend that your way is the only way forward. There's a beat. A long, unbearable beat. Cruz's eyes flash with something, anger, frustration, maybe even a hint of fear. His mouth opens as if to respond, but no words come out. His usual quick-witted retorts are gone, replaced by a stunned silence that spreads across his face. The audience watches in disbelief. For the first time in the entire debate, Cruz has no comeback. The arrogance that once defined him has crumbled under the weight of Crockett's calm, devastating response. He's left scrambling, trying to find the words to recover, but there's nothing left. Crockett's voice rises once more, quiet but undeniable. You don't get to hide behind your fancy words anymore, Senator. You don't get to lecture people on what's best for them when you've spent your career making their lives harder. The room erupts. The applause is deafening. People rise to their feet, the energy in the room electric. It's as if the entire chamber has been holding its breath, waiting for this moment, and now, it's finally here. Cruz, his smirk gone, looks around at the crowd, a defeated man. His arrogance, the thing that had made him untouchable for so long, has been shattered in an instant. But this victory would have repercussions far beyond the chamber. The world is watching. Social media is already ablaze with the clip, with the moment when Crockett delivered the crushing blow that left Cruz speechless. The ripple effect would soon spread across the political landscape, marking this debate as a turning point in the fight for justice, fairness, and the very soul of America. The moment Crockett delivered her devastating counterattack, the room fell into a stunned silence. But outside that chamber, the world was already waking up to the implications. Within minutes, the viral clip flooded social media, sparking an uncontrollable firestorm of reaction. Twitter exploded with a single hashtag that encapsulated the shift, #CrockettSlays. It was a tidal wave of triumph, and it wasn't just limited to the left-wing echo chamber. People from every corner of the political spectrum, even those who had disagreed with Crockett's policies, couldn't help but admire the precision and composure she displayed. Across Facebook, videos of the moment racked up millions of views. People shared it like wildfire, reeling from the raw power of her words. The comment sections were flooded with praise, memes, and the kind of wild energy that only a truly iconic moment can spark. "She's the truth we've been waiting for," one post read. "Crockett just handed Cruz his lunch," said another. And yet another read, "Cruz never saw this coming." #mic drop #real leadership. TikTok was ablaze with reaction videos. Young activists, students, and everyday citizens reacted in real time, mouths agape as they witnessed Cruz crumble. Clips from their reactions were shared tens of thousands of times, with captions like, "When you thought Cruz was unbeatable, but then Crockett stepped in." It wasn't just a debate moment anymore. It had become a movement. The nation was watching as a rising star in politics had, in a matter of seconds, dismantled one of the Senate's most prominent figures. But it wasn't just the digital world that took notice. Political commentators, from the most conservative pundits to liberal media outlets, were in a frenzy. On CNN, pundits dissected the moment, each clip replaying Crockett's words with near-religious reverence. "What we just saw," one analyst said, "was the kind of leadership that this country desperately needs." The calm, cool, and collected way Crockett handled Cruz, it wasn't just a takedown. It was a message. She reminded the entire nation of what real leadership looks like. Meanwhile, on Fox News, Cruz's own supporters struggled to defend him. The usual smarmy talking points were nowhere to be found. The commentators fumbled, attempting to salvage what little dignity Cruz had left. "Senator Cruz wasn't given a fair shot," one of them sputtered. "She was playing to the crowd." But the damage had been done, and even the most loyal Cruz supporters knew it. There was no salvaging the man who had been so thoroughly exposed. His arrogance had been his undoing. Even more surprising was the reaction from across the celebrity spectrum. Hollywood stars, who had long kept a distance from the political arena, couldn't resist chiming in. "That was everything," said actress Kerry Washington in a tweet that garnered millions of likes. "Crockett didn't just shut Cruz down, she shut down the system he represents." Oscar-winning actor Mahershala Ali posted, "Real leaders don't have to scream to be heard. Jasmine Crockett is the future." And comedian John Oliver took to Twitter with a playful jab, "Ted Cruz just learned that being right doesn't beat being righteous." But it wasn't just the celebrities with massive followings who rallied behind Crockett. Regular citizens, many of whom had never heard of her before the debate, flooded social media with support. "I'm voting for Crockett in 2024, one post read. "She's the only politician who's actually listening to us." A viral tweet from an immigrant rights activist summed it up: finally, someone who speaks the truth about what's happening to our communities. Crockett for president. The ripple effect spread far beyond the digital world and into the physical realm. Political rallies organized in support of Crockett began popping up around the country, often organized by young people and community activists. It was clear that something had shifted, a cultural turning point. Political movements that had once seemed fringe were now emboldened, inspired by the idea that someone in power finally had the courage to stand up to the establishment with the force of truth on their side. The movement wasn't just about policy, it was about integrity, about the courage to call out the lies and hypocrisies that had long festered in Washington. At the same time, the condemnation of Cruz's antics grew louder. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now being scrutinized by everyone from his political allies to his former donors. News outlets began to dig into his past comments, his support for policies that disproportionately harmed marginalized communities, and his repeated failures to address the needs of the people. The narrative had shifted. Cruz was no longer just the self-assured politician with a sharp tongue, he was now a symbol of everything wrong with the system. And with Crockett's mic drop moment, that symbol had been irrevocably tarnished. The Democratic Party, sensing an opportunity, rallied around Crockett's victory, urging the nation to recognize her as the future of progressive politics. "This is the type of leadership we need," said one top party official. Crockett represents the new generation of leaders who are not afraid to confront the tough issues head-on. She was now positioned not just as a rising star, but as a standard-bearer for the future of the party. But the aftermath revealed something even more unexpected. Cruz, ever the survivor, was not about to go down quietly. Behind closed doors, sources leaked that he was already planning his political comeback. "He's angry, but he's plotting his next move," one insider said. "He doesn't know how to deal with this level of humiliation. But he'll try." The political establishment held its breath, wondering whether Cruz could recover from this public defeat, or whether his career was now truly finished. For the rest of the nation, though, one thing was clear: Jasmine Crockett had not only beaten Cruz in a debate, she had beaten the system he represented. The moment had transcended politics. It was a symbol of change, of a new, unapologetic generation of leaders who would not be swayed by the lies and manipulations of the old guard. And in the aftermath, a single question echoed across the airwaves and social media: what's next for Jasmine Crockett? The answer, it seemed, was clear: this was just the beginning. The applause from the crowd had barely begun to fade when Jasmine Crockett leaned into the microphone one last time. The lights above gleamed down, casting long shadows on her face, but the calm determination in her eyes was unmistakable. The debate was over. Cruz had been silenced. But for Crockett, this was never about a single confrontation, it was about something much larger. With the weight of a nation watching, she took a slow, deliberate breath, grounding herself. It was as though everything she had worked for, everything she had fought through, had culminated in this final moment. Her voice, steady and unwavering, rang out with the clarity of truth. "Let's be clear," she began, her words cutting through the lingering tension in the room. "What we witnessed today wasn't about one politician besting another in a public spectacle. It wasn't about winning an argument or scoring points. It was about something more. Something far more important." The audience, still buzzing from the intensity of the exchange, now fell into a rapt silence. Cruz, for the first time in the entire debate, was nowhere to be seen. His smirk was gone. His arrogance evaporated. But Crockett stood tall, a beacon of calm in the midst of the storm. This moment belonged to her. "It's about the values that this country was built on," she continued, her voice carrying the weight of every injustice, every sacrifice, every fight that had come before her. "It's about justice for those who have been ignored and left behind. It's about equality, not just in theory, but in practice. It's about giving everyone the same chance, the same shot at success, not because of who they know, or how much money they have, or where they were born, but because they are human. Because they are deserving." She paused, letting the magnitude of her words sink in. There was no showmanship here, no theatrics, no sensationalism. Just pure, undeniable truth. And that truth is this, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room: the system we live under, the system Senator Cruz defends, is built on lies. Lies that say some people are more deserving of success than others. Lies that say a person's worth is determined by their bank account, their race, their background, or their zip code. Lies that say if you're not born with privilege, you're not worthy of a fair chance. Crockett's words were simple, but they hit with the force of a hammer. The audience could feel it. Cruz's rhetoric, his attacks, his disdain for the very people he claimed to represent, it all seemed to vanish in the face of Crockett's quiet strength and moral clarity. This was no longer a debate, it was a reckoning. "What's happened to this country?" she asked, her voice growing more impassioned. "How did we get here? When did we start believing that service to the people wasn't the highest calling? When did we start putting ourselves first, our egos, our personal gain, over the needs of those who trusted us to represent them?" She stepped forward slightly, her eyes locking with the camera, as if speaking directly to every person watching at home. "I came into this work because I believe in dignity. I believe in serving the people, not using them. I believe that public office isn't a prize to be won, but a responsibility to be honored. And when we stop living by those principles, when we let power and greed cloud our vision, we lose sight of what truly matters." Her words were no longer just a message for the audience in the room. They were for the millions of people watching across the nation, people who had long been told that their struggles didn't matter. People who had been made to feel small, powerless, and insignificant. Today was never about one debate, one man, or one argument, Crockett continued, her voice rising, the clarity and conviction growing stronger with each word. It was about showing every single person who has ever felt overlooked, silenced, or ignored, that they matter. Their struggles matter. Their dreams matter. And that they have a voice in this country. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. But Crockett wasn't finished yet. "Because this fight, this movement, it isn't just mine. It's ours. It's the fight of every person who's ever been told that their dreams are too big, their voices too quiet, or their worth too small. It's the fight of every immigrant who has crossed oceans for a better life. It's the fight of every working-class family struggling to survive. And yes, it's the fight of every person who's been told that because of who they are, where they came from, or the color of their skin, they don't belong." She took another deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. "And this fight," she said, her voice firm and resolute, "is one that will never be silenced." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the steady beat of Crockett's words echoing in the hearts of those who listened. Cruz, still sitting in stunned silence, couldn't respond, couldn't even find the words to counter the undeniable power of what Crockett had just laid before the nation. And that, in the end, was the victory. Not just the rhetorical win in the chamber, but the moral clarity that had shattered the foundation of everything Cruz represented. "The truth is simple," Crockett concluded, her voice ringing out with the finality of a promise. "It's not about how many times we win or lose. It's about whether we fight for what's right. And today, we've shown the world what true leadership looks like, not in arrogance, not in fear, but in integrity." The room erupted. The applause came not just from a few scattered hands, but from the heart of the audience, from the soul of the movement that had been ignited in that very moment. Crockett had delivered not just a message to Cruz, but to every American watching, reminding them that true leadership wasn't about power. It was about service. The nation had witnessed something rare, true leadership, when it mattered most. Jasmine Crockett's victory over Ted Cruz wasn't just a personal win, it was a triumph for American values. It was a reminder that leadership isn't about arrogance, entitlement, or political gamesmanship. It's about dignity. It's about truth. It's about fighting for the people who've been overlooked, marginalized, and silenced. In that debate, Crockett didn't just defeat Cruz, she reminded us all of the power of integrity and the strength that comes from standing up for what's right. Her words echoed through that chamber, but they're not just words, they're a call to action. A reminder that true leadership doesn't come from those at the top, but from the people who rise to challenge the status quo. People like you. People like us. The fight isn't over. Every one of us has a role to play in shaping the future of this country, whether it's through voting, organizing, or standing up for justice in our communities. The power is in our hands to demand the changes we need. To hold our leaders accountable. To create a world where every voice is heard and every person is treated with respect. So, what's next? It's simple. Share this video, spread the message, and help keep this momentum going. Crockett's win is just the beginning, but it's one we can all be a part of. If you believe in dignity over hate, service over selfishness, and the will of the people over entrenched corruption, then it's time to act. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, share this video to inspire others, and join the movement to bring real change to America. The future is ours to shape, and it starts with leaders like Jasmine Crockett. Will you be part of it? Share this video, subscribe to our channel, and join the movement to bring real change to America.